God, thank you for this day. Salamat sa oportunidad para mag-aral ng multiplying servant leaders. God, we pray that you would help us um, to really consider deeply how we can grow your kingdom and how we can lead and help others to lead. Pray all these things in the name of Jesus. Amen. Okay, before we get into the meat for today, there are a couple things. One of which was, sadly, I forgot to ask when we were ending the course earlier, else I would have changed the pacing a little bit. Turns out we have this week and next
Amen.
week, so we will do what we can for this. Uh, for this next 2 weeks. Um, there's been some questions about assignment, and apologies for not being more detailed on this earlier. I've been mentioning this, but we weren't really ready to do it yet because we hadn't got to that part in the curriculum. Um, there are 4 parts to this, but before you get too concerned, 2 of them are very short. These 2 are the ones that are a little bit more involved. So the first thing, and we're going to cover today how you do a lesson plan, and we're going to recover today inductive study questions. And so you're going to pick one lesson from the Galatians curriculum, and you're going to make a lesson plan. We're going to talk about how you do that. You make it, how you define a key concept, like what your main point is you're trying to get across. What are your objectives? What are you trying to accomplish? And outline what you're going to do in the course with an estimate for time. If you have 2 hours, how are you going to spend those 2 hours? You're going to have 15 minutes for introduction, get people going, you know, 10 minutes for prayer at the end. What's it going to look like for you to do this? Um, so that's creating a lesson plan and then make inductive study questions, in particular observation, interpretation, and application. So you're going to look at the passage that's covered in that lesson, and you're going to think through observation, interpretation, application questions for them. Next week, we're going to be dancing through really the rest of the curriculum. It are a number of lessons, but there's really just a few key concepts that are sort of spelled out. And one of the things we're going to look at is they don't necessarily call it exactly this, but they do spell it out. What's often called the MAUL approach for handoff. MAUL stands for model, assist, watch, leave. So we'll look at that next week. And so this week, you're going to want to work on these 2. Create your lesson plan and make inductive study questions. Next week, this is going to be basically one paragraph. What is MAUL? What is this technique? It's important enough that I really wanted you to be able to repeat it on your own so that you can make use of it as you're moving forward. And then the fourth one, you can do this now or you can do it next week. Uh, give your plan for starting your own Galatians class. Who do you plan on asking? When do you want to start it? Where will you host it? This is just trying to put some details and drive so that when this course ends, you can say, yeah, this was my plan. I'm going to try to stick to it. I'm going to try to actually start a Galatians course. Okay. These 2 are very easy. One paragraph each. These ones are a little bit more involved. You can get started this week. And I'm going to, again, cover this content again. Honestly, this is one of the most important things you can do for yourself is get used to learning how to ask these questions. And then I'm going to talk about this. All this will be due um, the week. So you're graduating on the 25th, I believe. And so next week we're going to finish this, and so in 2 weeks is when this is due. The whole this whole part of it. Well, John Paul, realize you just hopped on. This is our ending project. I'm going to put this slide. I'm going to put this text in the group. This is your ending project. It's going to be due. Let me find the right date. It's going to be due on the 23rd. And your assignment is this: create a lesson plan for one lesson in Galatians curriculum, make inductive study questions for the passage in the lesson, explain the Mall approach for handoff, which we'll cover next week.
I'd like to ask.
Sure.
So, lilinawin ko for us. We are going to have a lesson in one lesson plan for one lesson in Galatians.
One lesson.
So we have Galatians 1 to, how many is that? 1 to 10?
You can.
Okay, so one lesson lang. Tapos gagawa kami ng key concept, lesson objective, outline. Tapos in study for passage.
Yeah.
Okay. Parang ano to, para preaching to, pastor ah. Observation, interpretation, application.
Well, the key thing is this isn't about preaching. This is about study, right?
It's studying, more so like that.
Because the reality.
Tapos the mall.
Mall. And so again, this.
Okay.
We're going to cover this.
Well, we will make questions.
Yeah. You don't have to make a whole bunch of questions. Mostly, I want to see that you know how to ask the right kind of questions. I'm not going to ask for all possible observation, interpretation, and application, because you can do a lot. I'm just asking for a few of them, 4 or 5 questions that show me that you know how to ask. That show me you know what observation is as different than interpretation and application. That's what I'm really looking for. So, yep. And what I'm going to do is, there we go. I'm going to copy this right now, put it in the, group. There we go. Better. You can see it more clearly. Okay. Without any further ado, let's jump into the course. Let me get us. Okay. So this is where we ended last time, was on using questions to facilitate learning. We talked about introductory questions. We talked about inductive study questions. There are 3 main aspects of inductive study method. Observation, which is what is happening? What is this text saying? What is going on? Your goal in this is not to apply it to your life yet, not even to understand the general truths about God or for people. Your goal is very narrow. What did the author of this passage want his or her audience to understand from this text? And so, here are some examples of observation questions. Let me make this bigger so it's easier. Okay. Examples. Who are the characters in this passage? What does the passage say about these individuals? What happened? List the facts set forth in the passage. And note this, without elaboration. This is what they're trying to do, is to get us to get the whole picture before we start trying to assign timeless meaning. If you remember, we looked at First Timothy last week. We used this process where we looked at, said, okay, well, asking the meaning questions from Paul to the audience, what was it that Paul was talking about when he said, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me? Was it talking about making 3-pointers like Steph Curry? Or was it talking about being able to be content, whether you're in a wealthy family with a lot of position or whether you're locked in a prison? So, when did this event happen? What is the distance between two cities mentioned in the passage? And so, like, observation questions can be broader. What does this mean to the people? It can be very specific. Hey, what actually happened? How do we know if this is a significant or not significant thing? Kind of working into the very details of it. Who's speaking in the passage? To whom are they speaking? What is the author's stated purpose in writing this passage? What is the specific circumstance or situation described in this passage? These are all things that we have to wrestle with, have to look at before we can actually assign meaning. So again, just to kind of illustrate, okay, I'll do that here in this first little bit of Galatians, just as a. Well, I'll do it in the second chapter of Galatians, just so I don't steal any of your thunder in case you choose this passage. But let's say we were doing this passage here, the 3:1 through 5. And let me make this bigger so you can more easily see it. Okay. So 3:1 through 5 says, "You foolish Galatians, who has cast a spell on you? Before your eyes, Jesus Christ was vividly portrayed as crucified. The only thing I want to learn from you is this: did you receive the Spirit by doing the works of the law, or by believing what you heard? Are you so foolish? Although you began with the Spirit, are you now trying to finish by human effort? Have you suffered so many things for nothing? If indeed it was for nothing, does God then give you the Spirit and work miracles among you by your doing the works of the law, or by your believing what you heard?" So let's talk about the difference between observation, interpretation, and application questions here. Observation questions are things like, when he says, "You foolish Galatians," who does he mean? Does he mean people in a church, people in a group of churches? Does he mean everybody in Galatia? Who is he talking about? That's an observation question. You're trying to make sense of the actual text and the original message to the original audience. Another observation question. Did you receive the Spirit by doing the works of the law or believing what you heard? Well, actually, I'll come back to that for a second. So before your eyes, Jesus Christ was vividly portrayed as crucified. Does this mean that they were there in Jerusalem when Jesus was crucified? Or does that mean that Paul is talking about his description of him, his explanation of what happened? Does God then give you the Spirit and work miracles among you by your doing the works of the law or by your believing what you heard? There's a question mark here. Is this a real question or a rhetorical question? Meaning, does Paul expect an answer or is he really asking? Now, these are observation questions. They're trying to get to the meaning of the text. The meaning by the author to the original audience. And what you'll notice about observation questions is that a lot of them are reasonably answered just by looking at the context. One thing I want to learn from you is this: did you receive the Spirit by works of the law or by believing what you heard? If you want to know who the Galatians are, well, if you look in chapter 1, you get the sense this is to a group of churches in the province of Galatia. And here he talks about, did you receive the Spirit, which means he's talking about Christians. So these are Christians in Galatia, likely the members of a group of churches that he had planted or that he knew about. We know from studying Galatians and its place in the life of Paul that he did his first missionary journey in this area. So this is how you do observation questions. You ask them, but then you also look for the answers first and foremost in the text and in the context itself. After you've worked there and mined that, then you can go to commentaries or other tools as you have them available. But most importantly is that you look at those questions and you come back to the text and say, do I have the answer already? So that's observation questions. Now, interpretation questions. Let's look at this, where he says, did you receive the Spirit by doing the works of the law, by believing what you heard? In observation, we notice these question marks are actually rhetorical. He's assuming an answer. He's assuming the answer is by believing what you heard. That's what he's driving this towards. We know that, again, by context, they began with the Spirit. Are you now trying to finish by human effort? Human effort is in contrast to believing what you heard. So, interpretation question. What is opposed to faith in this text? How do we, or what is the use of faith in this passage? What is the importance of faith in this passage? Because what you see here is that faith is opposed to works of the law. Faith is opposed to the work that we do. Believing what you heard in the context, going back, is how we became Christian. And believing what you heard here is how we continue in the faith, how we grow up in the faith. When God does amazing things through us, it's not because we worked harder than the next guy. It's because we believed what we heard. So interpretation is not about that context. It's about general ideas. What does this teach us about God? What does it teach us about us? What does this teach us about the way that God works? Another interpretation question. finishing. This term finish. Sorry, let me go back to what does finishing in the Christian life mean, and how should faith be a part of that? There's a big idea. Most of the interpretation questions will get driven back to the main idea, and here it's the centrality of faith in our ongoing Christian life. And so, what does it mean to finish? What does it mean? And here it's really talking about in our life of sanctification, how are we to progress in that? How are we to do the best we can with the time that we have? And how are you trying to finish? You began by accepting Christ as your Savior. How do you finish? And that is through the same faith you began. So these are interpretation questions. It's asking about the general thing. Then application. So observation looked at the text, focused on the context, in this case, of Paul and the Galatian churches, trying to understand the message Paul was giving them. Interpretation asks, what general principles does this reveal about God and his plan and about people? Application then takes what we interpreted about the centrality of faith in ongoing sanctification and how it's not as a result of work. Something Reynolds is messaging. Okay. Yeah, he can't make it this time. Okay. So what do we do with application? So in application, we take what's interpreted and we dial it in to individual contexts. So we can ask a question. In what ways are we tempted to work, to do the works of the law, to grow in sanctification as opposed to living by faith? So that's a good question, right? It takes the basic idea and says, okay, well, where do we get this wrong? Where is it that we wind up in the same situation the Galatians are in, where we are trying to finish by works of the law? Other application questions. Why is it so hard for us to trust that faith is enough? What is it that gets in the way of really following this truth? Another application question could be, in what ways have you seen this truth lived out in your life, where instead of working, you trusted in God and you saw growth and sanctification? So these are things that get to my context and my experience. And it's really especially important that in application, we do more asking of questions than tell it. And the reason for that is my context is not the same as Edna's or as John Paul's or Cecilia's. We all have different contexts. We all have different personalities, different strengths and weaknesses. And so how I struggle in living by faith is going to be different than others. And so I can't answer the specifics of this for you. And you can't answer it in many cases for your people. Now, by asking the question, you can help them sort through good and bad answers, right? Because you may not be able to pick out the perfect right answer, but you can probably recognize some wrong answers, right? It might be somebody's like, oh, I don't have any problem with this. Like, really? Let's talk about maybe some places where legalism has crept in. Some likely places. So, observation in the text itself, dealing with the message, dealing with the actual message of the author to the audience. Interpretation, general principle about God, about people. Application. You specifically, concretely, me specifically, concretely. What should we do because of this bigger concept? Okay, I've been talking a bit. It's time to once again go back to you. I'm going to flip a little bit later on in Galatians. Let's look. Yeah. Here, Galatians 5:1 through 6. I'm going to read it again, then I'm going to ask you to come up with observation, interpretation, application questions. For freedom, Christ has set us free. Stand firm then, and do not be subject again to the yoke of slavery. Listen, I, Paul, tell you that if you let yourself be circumcised, Christ will be of no benefit to you at all. And I testify again to every man who lets himself be circumcised that he is obligated to obey the whole law. You who are trying to be declared righteous by the law have alienated from Christ. You've fallen away from grace. For through the Spirit, by faith, we wait expectantly for the hope of righteousness. For in Christ Jesus, neither circumcision nor uncircumcision carries any weight. The only thing that matters is faith working through love. Okay. Now this is to you. Give me an observation question. Give me a question that can help you make sense of this message from Paul to Galatia. Yes, no?
I think Pastor one is how Christ set us free.
How did Christ set us free? Great. Great observation question. And probably I'll tweak a little bit. What does Paul mean when he says Christ has set us free? Like the us there is Paul and the Galatian church. Like we're not in view yet, although we are Christians too, so it impacts us. In this case, when Paul says Christ has set us free, what does that mean? What is he set free from and to? Great question. Somebody else. Another question you can make of this passage, an observation question.
Question about circumcision, sir.
Okay. Give me the question.
Question.
Mm-mm.
How important is circumcision to Paul?
Okay. So you could ask how important is it to Paul that they be circumcised or uncircumcised? You could also ask how important was circumcision in the Jewish faith? Right? It seems to be a big deal. Yeah, these are all great observation questions. Good. Somebody else. I'd like each person to give me one.
Why? Can I?
Mm-hmm.
Why those who are declared righteous by the law have been fallen away from grace?
So why
did Paul told them the audience that those who are declared, why is it that he said that those who are
had a little trouble hearing the end of it because your internet connection was coming on and off, but I think I got the gist of it, the main idea, which is why does
problem?
Why
I
is
have a problem.
your internet? Yeah, it's a little bit slow today. I have my slow days too. So the why does Paul say that these people who are trying to be declared righteous by the law, why does he say that they're falling away from faith? That's a great observation question. You're trying to make sense of his statements. Great. Others. Observation question. John Paul, nod.
Sa akin po siguro, follow up lang din po dun kay,
Mhm.
kay Tita Edna. Yung ano po, what does it mean to be circumcised?
Okay.
Kasi po may dalawa pong klase ng, sa akin po, yung binabasa ko po siya, dalawang klase po ng circumcision dito.
Mm-mm.
Yung circumcision po na by
Yung
law,
katawan.
circumcised para ma-save ka. And yung isa naman po is circumcision of the heart.
Mm-mm.
Yung nagkaroon ka ng change of heart
Mm-mm.
kay Jesus Christ.
Mm-mm. That's a good question. Trying to understand, because there have been two different circumcisions talking about here. Is this the circumcision of the body or circumcision of the heart? Great question. Okay. Nod. Are you there, Nod? He might have stepped away. Okay. Let's go on to interpretation. Or, Nod, are you back? Okay, we'll move on to interpretation. So again, interpretation questions are asking the bigger, more general questions. What is this teaching us about God? What is this teaching us about how God works? What is this teaching us about the Christian life? Those kind of questions. So let's take a stab at an interpretation question.
Sir,
Mhm.
about circumcision again.
Okay.
Why is it so important to them to be circumcised? Physical and by heart.
So that's a good observation question. From interpretation, we wanted to kind of make
Okay.
yeah. Think about, what does this teach us about God? What does this teach us about faith? What does this teach us about the Christian life? Those kinds of questions.
Okay, sir. I'm sorry.
Yeah. That's why we're doing this.
I'll think of it.
Mm-mm.
What do you expect to be righteous? What do you expect for the hope of righteousness? Parang di ko makuha yun eh.
Okay, I think I
Through
know what
the
you're saying.
Spirit.
How can a Christian become righteous?
Righteous, okay.
Yeah, that might be a good question to ask. Is it, according to this, So how then is a Christian supposed to become righteous? Because he's saying it's not by the works of the law. So yeah, that's a good interpretation question. That's going from the specifics to the general. It's good. Okay.
What does matter? What matters? What matters? What is the most important thing in faith?
Yeah, that's another good one. Okay, let's.
What's the important thing in faith? Is it circumcision? Uncircumcision? Good thing? What is the thing that matters in faith?
Okay.
And how do you express it? Okay. The only thing that matters is faith through love. Diba? Yan yung mga nakuha ko na sir. I know already.
Yeah. Okay. Let's let somebody else.
You ask question based on the intents of on the context.
And what you're doing right there, where you thought through the question and the answer, and sometimes you go backwards, right? You look at the passage and you say, well, what's the main idea? And then you go backwards from the answer that you already know to the question that leads to it, because you're trying to lead people to the main ideas. And so sometimes you go backwards. If you already know the passage pretty well, you might already be able to get there without asking any questions. And you have to think, well, what question leads to this? Okay, somebody else. Another interpretation question. No?
I think, Pastor, what does it mean to be righteous?
What does it mean to be righteous? That's good. So you're taking it's something that's embedded in the text. It's a key idea, but you're asking the general question. Okay, what is righteousness? What does it mean to be righteous? What does it mean for a Christian to be righteous? Good. John Paul, Edna.
Interpretation question.
Okay. What do you think, Edna or John Paul?
Try lang, sir.
Yeah.
Siguro interpretation question po. Where does a Christian stand?
That's a good one. It says stand firm then. Okay. What is it, where is it that I'm standing? What does it mean for a Christian to stand firm? Yeah, that's good. Got one to try it, Ma'am Edna?
I'm trying to.
Uh, it's hard sometimes to get up to that.
Yes. Mhm. Um, um, why did Paul say in verse 2 of chapter 5 that if you let yourself be circumcised, Christ will be of no value?
Mm,
Why
right.
did he say that?
So I'm going to tweak it just a little bit. um, kind of keeping the context for all Christians, which is implicit in your question. Um, a way you could phrase that is, if Christians are circumcised now, does that mean that you're going to be alienated from Christ? All right, that's. I mean, it's a sort of very concrete and detailed question, but I mean, there are a lot of Christians who are circumcised who are not Jewish, right?
The
And
Filipino.
maraming Filipino, maraming Americano. And so then the question is, like, does that mean that some of us are alienated from Christ because of a choice that our parents made? That's a good question. Okay, application. And again, to do application, you already have to have done the interpretation. So you have to have some idea that this passage is talking about. And look at that last phrase. The only thing that matters is faith working through love. And here he's carrying on this idea that subjecting ourselves to the Old Testament law is abandoning the grace that God has us, abandoning the way of life he intends. And if we say, you must be circumcised, you must keep the Sabbath on the Saturday, you must do all of the feasts and festivals, regardless of whether you're Jewish or not, you must do all these things or else God is not pleased with you, then you've pulled yourself from the yoke of slavery to the goddess Athena, to the yoke of slavery, to a system that's not intended to be active now in Christianity. And so, that being main idea here, how do you apply that? What kind of questions can you ask to apply that? What are you guys' thoughts about application questions?
Right, Pastor.
Okay.
Application question is, how do faith and grace work together in our Christian life?
Can you say that one more time?
How do faith and grace work together in our Christian life?
Okay. To make it a little more, you'll want to tweak it a little more, make it a little more targeted to like how does faith and grace work together in your life or in my life? Like that's one of the keys to trending out of interpretation to application is it's not general, it's you, it's me, it's us. So that's a good question, and just a little more targeted makes it ideal.
Means, Pastor, application is for our own life. How can I apply the
Tama. Okay. I'm Cecilia.
What is the most puputol ako, sir. What is the most essence in having faith? What is the most important thing that you as Christians should have to make us feel free from what we have been, from where we have been, from our old selves? What is the most essential thing that we have to? What really matters? Can you rephrase? I just lost because my internet is
up and down. It's so hard.
Good.
I think I can rephrase that a little bit better for you. So
yeah,
you're linking two things: the idea of what does true faith look like, and how does it set us free, and to move it into from the general to the application space. It might be, how have you been set free by your faith? So that makes it specific to the person. They can think about it and they can see and they can learn from each other's experiences. Oh, because you trusted God, you didn't have to worry about the shame you might have felt from bad decisions 10 years ago, 20 years ago. You can trust that God has covered those over, and you follow God. You don't have to be that anymore. You don't have to keep that label on you anymore. You can be free from that.
What sets us free? Other thing is, what sets you free?
Good. Okay. Someone else. I haven't called on you now because it seems like you also have a bad internet, but if you are able to, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Otherwise, John Paul or Edna.
JP.
Application question.
I'm always lost.
You were lost and now you're found.
Ang answer ko po, sir, is where am I circumcised?
Am I?
Then inisip ko po kasi, sir, na ano eh.
Oh yeah, the it's funny because that question, because it's sort of a little it can grab people's attention, right? And so that's actually effective. It's an effective thing to do, especially in a group of guys, or if you're, like, oh, okay.
Inisip ko po kasi, sir, parang ano sa akin siya, parang self-check.
Mm-hmm.
Kasi minsan baka nagiging legalistic na po ako, or katulad po, may hinahandle po ako ngayon ng Bible study and may isa po doong Catholic. Parang gusto kong sabihin, may mga terms po ako na gustong sabihin na medyo legalistic yung dating, pero yun po.
That's really good, and that's a smart way to grab people's attention and make them actually think about it. Yeah,
medyo double meaning lang po.
That's good. It's okay sometimes to be a little shocking. Sometimes you have to do that to get people to think. Okay. Ma'am Edna.
Ito po, ewan ko kung tama ito. How can someone be justified without being alienated from Christ?
Good. Can somebody be justified, declared righteous, without being alienated from Christ? How can you? That's a great way. Bring it home. Say, do you want to be alienated from Christ? No. How do you avoid that? And you avoid that by starting and continuing with faith plus nothing. It's great. Okay. I know this was kind of a hard interaction, lots of thinking, but I wanted us to do this together so that you're ready for your assignment, because now you have it in your mind, and this afternoon you can go do and pick your passage and then write a few down. And what I'm asking for is not a bunch, just a couple of observation, a couple of interpretation, a couple of application questions to show me that you know how to ask them. Okay. We're going to take a 5-minute break, maybe 10-minute break. I'll give you a 10-minute break. Then we'll come back and we'll talk about how to make a lesson plan. Okay. Break now. Okay, so I'm going to be skipping past a few things as we're trying to make up some ground. One of the things that was kind of shown here that's worth looking into are examples of follow-up questions. These are useful things to how when somebody answers a question you've made and they don't really get to the point, they don't get far enough, this is how you can drill past that, some ideas. Also, it's worth evaluating a question. When you get done and you've taught a course, go back to those questions and say, did they work, or do they need to be tweaked? Do they need to be adjusted? Okay, so this next lesson is talking about creative learning activities. I'm just going to give a really high overview. A lot of times when we're teaching, especially with difficult concepts, we need to change things up. Some of the ways we can do that is, instead of trying to answer as a big group, you can split people up to be in smaller groups or even one-on-one. That can allow people more time to talk. It can also make it less intimidating to talk, because somebody who's not necessarily bold enough to share with the whole group, if it's just them and one other person, they can often do it. And so one idea for facilitation, especially if you need to give people more time to interact, get more people talking, is to split up into smaller groups and then just have them interact with each other. Another thing is using visual aids. It's hard to do it remotely, but you saw what I did last time, where I took the model of time management of the rocks and the sand, the little rocks and the water, and showed how I found a YouTube video that actually demonstrated that image. And so visual aids are a good way. Illustrations. A lot of sermons, a lot of times the way you start a sermon is by telling a story, by giving an example of something that people can relate to that connects to the main idea. So illustrations are very helpful. The other thing you can do to really get people engaged in it is to role play, to act out an idea, or even to have somebody else come in and talk. You were talking about Pastor Louis. Actually, so sometimes you can have like somebody already in the small group share if it's something that they have particular knowledge of, or just to give them a chance to talk. Other times you can find somebody who has special information. So I was teaching an apologetics course, and I brought Pastor Louis Medina in to talk about the Iglesia ni Cristo, because he's been on the inside, and to talk about how they did things. And so a guest teacher can be a good thing. Another thing, and I've done this a lot, is in a small group, you share facilitation, where it's not just one person, it's two together. And where you trade off and you talk and you say, well, okay, I'm going to do this part, you do that part. And that way, we find that when there's more than one voice, more than one person, it provides more variation to the team, more ideas. And, if if you get sick, or if you have a day where you can't make it, the other person can. It's just a really helpful thing. And then student involvement, especially as time goes on and people are in a group, getting people more involved and getting them bold enough to not just answer questions, but to lead and to ask questions. Another thing, and I'm often have to be reminded of this, is keep lectures short. Try to engage people. Don't. It's getting to the point now where like a little alarm goes off my head that says, oh, I've been talking too long. I need to get out of the way and let somebody else talk. So, that's a very brief overview of creative learning activities. It's more to tell you that these tools exist. And as you start to teach, or as you continue teaching, as you're leading small groups, use these to break up the uniformity, the every week is like the last week, to change things up and to grab people's attention, especially as you see there's certain parts people kind of lose their attention on, to really get people back into it. Now, here's the part that is more directly related to your assignment: writing lesson plans. So the first question is, why do we do this? Could I have somebody read this part here?
Sir, can I read? Can I read?
Yes, please.
Topic 1, why is lesson planning important? The time available for training servant leaders is always limited. In order to make the most of the time we have with our students, we must carefully plan how we will use that time. Well-prepared lesson plans allow for varying conditions while still focusing on what is truly important in each lesson. All the information in a given lesson is important, but not everything is equally important. Knowing its lesson's most important ideas helps us choose what to cover. This is especially important if the time allocated for the lesson is unexpectedly cut short. Students will only remember and take away a limited amount of information, so the facilitator must choose carefully what to emphasize. The students will be able to apply only what they remember. If there are too many areas of focus, the students may be overwhelmed and thus remember very little from the lesson. If the facilitator fails to focus adequately on the vital areas, applications will be missing as well.
Salamat. So this is why we lesson plan. We lesson plan because there's only so much time and there's only so much attention and our minds are only so big, right? You can only hold on to a couple things at a time. So we really have to know what we're trying to get at. So what does a good lesson plan have? Here is the key. A good lesson plan contains 4 elements. A key concept statement that summarizes the central truth of the lesson. What you want, whether you're facilitating a group or preaching a sermon, you want one sentence that is your main point. Now, in preaching a sermon, you really need to have one sentence. You can have subpoints, but you need to have one sentence that says, this is what I want people to get out of it. Sometimes in teaching, you'll have a couple of lessons you're teaching, or just because you're covering a lot of topics, it needs to be maybe 2 or at most 3. But you really need your key concept to be 1 or 2 is really what you're aiming for. Because really, people will remember additional details, but they really won't get more than 1 or 2 main points for that class period. And so step 1 in your good lesson plan, you're going to go through your whole lesson in Galatians, and you're going to, it might be something that's already written there, it might be given to you, or it might be something that you come up with on your own. You're going to say this sentence right here. It can be English, can be Tagalog, can be whatever. But this is what I want my students to get out of this lesson. Again, 1, maybe 2, at most 3. Then lesson objectives. So this spells out in more detail. So you have the one sentence, which is, this is the main idea. Lesson objectives. And so that's what you want your students to know, to be, to do as a result of the lesson. And so let's take, we were talking about freedom that comes from a life lived by faith as opposed to a life lived by works. Notice that was one sentence. Long sentence, but one sentence. If that's our key concept, some lesson objectives, things you want your students to know. That sanctification is a faith process, not a work process. Things you want your students to do. You want them to turn away from legalism and turn towards a life of love driven by faith. You want them to be people of faith, not of works. So those are some of the things you might come out of that particular passage. It's how you might say, okay, I'm breaking this apart, looking at what I want my students to grow as a result of this. At the main truth, again, one sentence, maybe 2, at most 3. Then lesson objectives. You're thinking about how you want your students to change. Then you have an outline of the lesson itself. And so let me pull open, here is, let's go to the table of contents. Let's say, okay. Let's say you're going to do lesson 2. So 29 to 51. Let's get to, oh, wow. Sorry. Where am I? Page 29. There we go. Okay. So let's say you're going to do lesson 2. Now, in lesson 2, you have topic 1, 2, and 3. And let's say that you have 2 hours like I've been taking to do this lesson. So you're going to spend some time here in topic 1, some time in topic 2, some time in topic 3. You're going to have some time at the beginning for people, just for introduction, for casual conversation as people are joining. Somewhere in here, you're going to have a break, right? Because people need breaks. There, at the end of it, there is a quiz. Are you going to do the quiz in the class, or are they going to do it afterwards? Are you going to, skip certain parts? If you take 2 hours and you take 15 minutes at the beginning for introduction, 10-minute break partway through, you actually have an hour and 35 minutes. And so you have 3 sections you're trying to do in an hour and 35 minutes. And so you might push it up like that. And so that's what a lesson plan looks like. You're going to have the outline in the curriculum, but you're also going to have the other things that are part of the class. You might have a prayer time at the end. You might have a discussion. And so you carve out those times, and then you kind of say, okay, well, if I want to have this prayer time at the end, and I want to have a 10-minute break, and then I want to have an introductory period of 15 minutes, then that's going to leave me with an hour and 15 minutes for 3 sections. Hour and 15 minutes, which is 75 divided by 3, leaves you with 25 minutes per section. So you might want to say, okay, well, it's 25 minutes for each section. Now you might wonder, why are you doing it this way? Why do we have this kind of timing? Why are you trying to do that? Let me go back here. And the reason for that is, so when you need to move on. When it's taking too long, or when you say, oh, okay, well, I need to skip past. Maybe I just need, we discussed all the questions in the crisis of legalism. The epistle, we're at 20 minutes. I just need to read the crisis in Galatia and move on, because we're out of time. We got to move on. And that's normal. You never have enough time for everything you want to do. And so you pay attention to the clock and say, okay, well, this is when I need to move on to the next thing, or else I'm going to have no time for the rest. So 4 things. Key concept statement. Again, that's 1 sentence, maybe 2, most is 3, that describe, here is the main idea of this lesson. Lesson objectives. How do you want your students to change and grow because of this lesson? Then the outline. It's what's in there plus the things that go around. Like, it's what's in the lesson plus the other flow of your time together. Introduction, prayer, break, those kind of things. And then you have your outline, put times to it so you know how it's supposed to go. That's what I'm asking you to produce as a lesson plan. And what you're going to do, again, you're going to take this Galatians course, and you're going to go here, and you're going to pick a lesson. It'll be lesson 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8. There's 8 different lessons. You just pick one. And you're going to read through that. You're going to think about it a little bit so you can have a sense of, here's what's happening. You need to have the main idea, and then split out the outline. What questions do you have about making a lesson plan? Seems pretty clear.
Pastor, yeah, question.
Apo?
Doon po sa ating gagawin, meron pong topic 2, topic 3. So, pwede po itong gamitin when I facilitate at pwede ko gamitin ito doon sa start po ako by next week.
Yeah, I mean, you can. So the only way you can do it, however, whenever you want to do it, as long as it's done in 2 weeks. So you can finish it next week. You can give the overall project to me in 2 pieces, if that makes sense. If you want to say, hey, I've got the lesson plan, I've got the questions, let me give them to you now, and then I'll do the next week. That's fine. However you want to get done, as long as all of it's turned in 2 weeks, by 2 weeks. Early is always better.
Thank you po, Pastor.
Any other questions?
None, sir.
Okay, so I'm gonna move on. Again, if you have other questions that come to your mind, you can post them to the group and I'll answer them as quickly as I can. So again, you have the assignment portion of it, but let's talk about the actual usage of a lesson plan. First thing is, when it actually comes to making a good lesson plan, it's most important that you spend time in the text, that you spend time in the lesson itself, that you have that background. The more time you're able to spend, the better your plan will be. Again, this is not about how you do the assignment. We all have limited time, I get that. But when it comes to actually teaching Galatians, you want to spend time first in the text, and then you want to spend time in the lesson plan. And then only after you've done that and you've spent time in prayer, only after that do you write your lesson plan. Again, I'm separating out how you're going to do the assignment versus how you really prepare to teach, because you have the restrictions of a short time, but when you're preparing to teach, for real, this is really how you want to do it. And that time spent in prayer, that time in the Word of God, that time in the lesson is what pays off. And once you've done that, then it's a lot easier to just sketch up something quickly. You can say, look, yeah, I think these couple things are the main things I want to make sense of. And because I can see in my own life how this is changing me, I have a pretty good idea of what I want to see changing in my students. So this is their step-by-step guide. So you go and pray, see the whole course, work carefully through the lesson, then choose your strategic focus. And so pray always. See the whole course. The idea here is know where you fit. If you're preaching a section in Galatians, if you're teaching a section in Galatians that has a lot to do with Paul's history, know why this matters. See, okay, he's talking about this history because he's trying to explain that the message he has is not against the other apostles. It's not different. It's the same message. He's trying to explain that this is from God and that this is what's really intended. And seeing the whole course, you can see, oh, this is where it fits in the overall idea of the letter of Galatians. Work carefully through the lesson. I try never to ask a question that I haven't already answered myself. I try never to ask people to do things that I haven't already walked through. So work carefully through the lesson. Choose your strategic focus. Again, you won't be able to say everything and do everything you want to, so you have to be strategic. Even though I'm a bit rushed here in the end of this course, there is a bit of a reason for the focus. It is very important in this course to work on our character and work first on our ability to teach before we so deeply invest in raising the next generation. We're going to talk a little bit about that. I'm going to a couple of key ideas, but it's it's really important that we learn to lead first before we we learn to teach others to lead. It's easy to be in a rush to see the big growth happen, that we don't invest deeply in our ability to take the next step. That's part of why this course has been so front loaded, so focused on the first few lessons rather than the last ones. And so choose strategic focus, form plans to focus. So your idea, you want to keep drawing people back to the main idea. You want to get them back to the key concept. You want to keep pulling them into the main thing you want them to learn. Summarize and lead to application. And so you want to get people from big ideas to actual concrete changes in life. Prepare your introduction and conclusion. This is especially, and this is one of those cases where teaching and preaching are very similar in this. How you get people into and out of really matter. They're very memorable. People who show up to a church to hear a sermon, you only have a couple of minutes to get their attention, or else it's lost and it's really hard to get back. Same thing when it comes to teaching. How you engage people, in some sense, matters for their attention and how they stay with you. And concluding is the same way. You want them to have something they can walk away with. So concluding can matter. We're going to, again, skim through lesson 9 as well. Let's see. Yeah, we're going to skim through lesson 9 as well in our last 10 minutes. And sorry to skim by. There we go. And then we'll talk about the last sections next week. So learning to lead a small group training session. So a few things about this. What does a useful and workable small group look like? And there's some very practical suggestions here. The first thing is the number of people. If you have like 4 or fewer people, it's hard to get consistent, good interaction. And if one person's out, it gets so much worse. So you want at least 5 or 6. Usually, in my experience, the best small groups are between 8 and 15, knowing that there's going to be in any small group, there winds up being attrition. And so if you start with 8, by the time you end, it might be 6. 6, you can get some good interaction. 3, it's hard. But there's an end point too, like 15 or 20. Once you get 15 or 20, it's hard for everybody to actually have time to speak. It's hard for people to really engage the whole group. And so the normal kind of wisdom is 8 to 15 is your best zone in number of people. When you start having 20, 25, 30, you wind up having to do mostly lecture, not as much interaction. Now, some key things about what you're looking for in a small group, what a well-run small group looks like. Encourages participation. It means that when somebody hasn't been talking very much, you try to reach out to them and get them to talk. It means if somebody's talking too much, you find a way to redirect it so that it's balanced. It builds relationships through the sharing of personal feelings, beliefs, and needs. And so it's not just about getting the information across. There's a reason why our introduction is mostly catching up, because I care about who you are and what's going on in your life. And you care about each other. And those relationships matter for us to be able to actually learn together. Well-led small group stimulates the sharing of new ideas and convictions. It should challenge. It should bring new ideas. If your small group just says everything you already believe and know and think, it's not helping you. Develops leadership potential and abilities through active involvement. You want to give people the opportunity to speak, to think, to share what their ideas are, share how they want to do things, make space. As a leader, you'll do your best work when you've learned the topic and the content well enough to know the best possible answer, and then you can get out of the way and let somebody else give it. When they can do that, that's fantastic. Helps each person develop his own conclusions and convictions. And this is one of the other hard things. It's so easy to say, look, I've done the work, I know the right answer, but people have to get there themselves. And sometimes we think we've got everything totally nailed down, and somebody else actually has a better idea or a better understanding. And we need to be okay with that. And we need to really, especially when it comes to convictions, when it comes to how am I going to apply this, that's going to have to come from the person himself. Encourages honesty and accountability about real life issues. Now, we haven't gotten to that depth as much in this course. One of the things that I actually do in small groups I lead back in Naga is we do a practice we call sharing a life story, where we give a very shortened 10, 15-minute description of what are the key 5 or 6 things that happened in my life to make me who I am. When did I become a Christian? What choices brought me to where I am? In doing that and in modeling it, we share not just the good decisions, but some of the bad decisions that also brought me to where I am. By modeling honesty and accountability in that, it brings a great deal more interaction about real life stuff. So, one way that we do that. Leading a small group. Permit the group to work. Again, and because we're covering a big topic in a short period of time, sometimes I have to speak a lot and get us going. But my goal is always to get you all working. Me telling you how to do something is not anywhere near as effective as you actually doing the work. Respect the value of each individual. We all have our own strengths and weaknesses, and we need to value and respect each person's contribution. And don't be quick to throw out the answer if people aren't answering. Your first step is to rephrase the question. It's to make sure, figure out where people are getting stuck. It might be that you missed an important piece of information they need to have, or it might be that how the question is phrased is confusing. And don't be afraid of a little silence. Sometimes people need to think. It's okay to give them time to think about answers. Encourage good discussion. You want discussion. You want people interacting. It's much more important that they interact over pretty good ideas than that they sit and listen to your perfectly thought out and worded idea. They'll take deeper their own formulation more than yours.
Sir.
Up.
Sir, what are we going to do to those who will throw us some questions that are not included in the topic, yet it's very scary one, and it's like, it's, dogmatic and all that. What are we going to do with those?
Good question.
Shall we say we're gonna make it a good question? Just like that? Okay, good question. We're gonna deal with it next time. That
Well, so it depends a lot on what kind of question and what the person's intention is. And so as you get better at this, you'll be able to better to handle these with more nuance. But here is a simple thought process. When somebody throws out a question that's not in my list of what I'm expecting to happen, first question is this on topic? Is this part of what we're actually working through, or is this just something that's on their mind? If it's something that's on their mind, you want to find a gracious and respectful way to say, that's a good question. It's not really what we're talking about here. Can you and I talk about this after the class is done? I want to talk to you about this. And you need to follow up, and you actually need to talk to them about that afterwards. But if it's off topic, then you want to take it after the group. Now, there are going to be lots of great questions that you haven't thought of that are on topic. So then the second question is, do you know the answer? And sometimes the answer is going to be yes. Other times it's going to be no. If you know the answer, then you have to ask yourself, okay, is now the best time to answer that? It might be it should be answered later. A lot of times what I will do is I'll try to respect, especially if I think somebody is legitimately asking the question. If they don't know that, they're curious, they don't want to understand. Just like your question right now. I know you've been in Bible studies where people completely derail it with a bunch of questions that aren't really on topic. So this is a good question to ask. And so what if it's on topic and if it matters, I'll usually go there with them as best as I can. Sometimes they ask you a great question and I have no idea. It's best to, in that circumstance, don't be defensive. Don't pretend like you have an answer. Say, wow, that's a really good question. I haven't thought of that. And then say, look, I want to get you a good answer to that, but I don't have one right now. Why don't I ask some people, do my own research. Next week, let's talk about that. Now, when you say that, you actually have to address it next week, right? You can't just say, good question, and then move on and then never talk about it. You actually have to do some work. But that is often very fruitful work, because if somebody asks you the question they really want to know, it's something we need to know too. And you're not on your own. Like you have people you can ask. You have the internet, you have resources. So what you'll find is that a lot of the really hard questions, it's not that there isn't an answer. It's that there's 3 possible answers, and we're not sure which one's the right one. And sometimes in those instances, it's okay to say, well, in the world of the church, there are 3 possible answers. There's A, B, and C. Right now, I'm leaning towards A, but any one of these could be the right answer. So it's up to you which one you think seems the best. Is that helpful?
My internet will die down again. That's why I can talk. I can't interact so much. In a little while, this will take off again. Oh my goodness.
I've learned to look where if I don't see you moving, I know you're frozen. So yeah, and there's a few things kind of related to that are here. There are times when this says take advantage of controversy. So one of the good things about people asking questions and people disagreeing is it means they're interested and they care. And so lean into that. You don't want people to start fights. I've sometimes leaned too far that direction and wound up, I've got to defuse the situation because people are really getting their feelings hurt. But a lot of times you want to lean into it, say, okay, there's a disagreement here. Good. Why? What is it that's making this hard? What is it that's confusing here? What is it that is causing you two to be on different positions here? That can often lead to a really useful and productive conversation. Especially when people get used to the idea that they can disagree and still be kind to each other and still respect each other's opinion. Emphasize the positive. When somebody gives you an answer that's really wrong, you still want to find something you can say that's nice about it that shows that, hey, I appreciate that you took a shot. I want this to be a safe place for people to try out wrong answers. And that's key. You want people to get all their wrong answers out in the small group, not outside, right? You want all the wrong answers to happen in the small group so you can say, oh, okay, that was good effort. Let's try this one. That's good. Wisely challenge superficial answers. There are a lot of times people just give the easy answer. And so when you see that, you say, okay, how does that work? Tell me more about that. Give me more detail. I want more than 5 words here. I want how this works out in your life. The managing common problem areas, and after this we'll stop. So common issues is people not talking. So often you get 2/3 of the way through your course, you want to start calling on people, like 2/3 of the way through your day's session. You want to start calling on people who've been very quiet. Get them to use their voice. Too talkative. So sometimes people go off and they have a lot of things to say and they have too much to say. And so you can find a way to gently say, okay, thank you. Let me ask somebody else's opinion. Who else has a thought about this? And find a way to make it where it's not rude. It's not saying, hey, you need to stop talking, but where it's like, okay, now let's have somebody else talk. Then talks about unrelated subjects or irrelevant contributions. So there'll be people who just want to hear themselves talk. And so sometimes you have to be like, okay, that's nice, but we can talk about that afterwards. What about on topic, on this idea? Other times they'll say, oh, I saw this thing on Facebook. You're like, okay, this is not particularly helpful. Let's go back to the text itself. Let's go to something which we can rely on. There are people who always look for problems. And sometimes what you have to do is you can't let them derail everything that's going on. Go, okay, well, that's an interesting, topic. We can get into that more later. Or they like to show off knowledge. They're looking for any opportunity to show that they're really smart. And so you kind of have to move away from them and ask other people more specifically. Again, periods of silence. The way that I normally deal with this is, first, I'd be okay with short periods of silence. That people need that to think. But if it's going on too long, I'll try to rephrase the question. I'll try to ask specific people. So, can you answer this? Can you give me your insight? Can you move on? Try to break past the normal barriers. The barriers of I don't understand. The barriers of I don't know if I should talk or not. The barrier of I'm not sure about my opinion. These are things that keep people from interacting. So try to help people get past that. Okay. We will end with that. Let me just bring back up. I know it's in the I know it's in the text of our group, but just as a reminder, this is your end project. You have 2 weeks to complete it. Lesson plan, key concept, lesson objectives outlined with time estimates. Inductive study questions for that passage. Again, let's say that you are doing in the Galatians course, let's say you were doing lesson 2. Let's say you're doing lesson 3. If you're doing lesson 3, it's on Galatians chapter 1. Let's say you would basically say, I'm going to give 2 or 3 observation questions somewhere in chapter 1. So the interpretation, application questions, whatever is easiest for you to do, you're going to put those questions in there, and then you're going to give a lesson plan for that lesson 3. Okay. We'll talk about this next week, and then you're going to give your plan for starting your own Galatians class. Who are you going to invite? When do you want to start it? Where will you host it? Okay, we are 8 minutes over. Let me pray for us, and we can be done. Salamat Ama sa oportunidad itong araw para mag-aral ng multiplying servant leaders. We pray that you would help us to be good facilitators of small groups, that we would be good not just at, that we would be useful at understanding your word and understanding the main ideas, but that we would also be good at leading a group to understand it for themselves and to engage with it and to grow and change because of it. Pray all these things in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you po.
Thank you.
Salamat po sa inyo.
Thank you so much. My connection is not good.
Yan na ng bagong route.